We've got a panic, and this is why they're flying in huge quantities of gold from London, and they've tapped out the London bullion market, and so much so that there's now a 4 to 8 week queue at the Bank of England to withdraw presumably leased gold from the Bank of England. So you can see that there's a real panic on here. We don't actually know the answer to this. I mean, what we do know is that the media, presumably tipped off by bullion banks in the LBMA, whatever, have said that the reason that gold is running up and you've got these huge, great premiums on futures relative to spot is because Trump might bring in 10% tariffs or 25% tariffs against Canada and Mexico and so on. So there's going to be a shortage of bullion. Now, I don't actually buy that story. I can see some people maybe going into the market and thinking, oh my goodness, we better go and buy some futures to get hold of some gold before this comes in. But I would have thought that actually they're in a minority. I think that it could have triggered something else. And to me, that other thing is probably, and I don't know for certain, but it seems to me this is the most likely candidate, probably the increased pace of stand for deliveries on COMEX. The level has actually been very, very high. And I think, we have to bear in mind that the whole point about futures is that, they're not meant to end up in delivery. Futures are a credit market, nothing to do with bullion. I mean, okay, if you've got lots and lots of positions, particularly short positions, then it makes sense, if you like, to have some bullion in the background. So you've got some sort of reserves, etc., etc. But basically, this is a credit market. It is not a physical bullion market. The problem is that for the last, is really since COVID, I think, certainly 2021, I noticed that these stands for deliveries, in other words, people deciding to go for physical settlement rather than closing out an expiring future, these physical demands, as it were, which are known as a stand for delivery, have been increasing and increasing and increasing. So I thought, well, let's have a look and see what the extent of it is. And what I found was that in 2021, we had 602.7 tons of gold stood for delivery. That was actually probably the highest, and that was in the wake of the COVID problem. So really between 21, 22, 23 and 24, there's 4 years. The total amount of gold bullion stood for delivery was 2,113.9 tons. That is an awful lot of gold. And if you look at the silver numbers, the figure there is 25,122 tons. Again, a very, very considerable sum. Since the end of last year, in other words, just going through January and the first few days of February, we've had an acceleration in the rate of stands for deliveries of gold. And that, I think, probably helps explain where the panic is. The reason this is important is that when it comes to getting delivery out of COMEX vaults, it's actually very, very difficult to do so. It's a long, protracted process. And not only that, but literally today or yesterday, there was a man who used to work for Sprott was describing what happened when they tried to stand for delivery for silver. And what was meant to be a 5-day settlement actually turned out to be a 9-month hassle with, excuses and excuses and excuses. And, and at one stage they asked for a bar list and nothing came and so on. So it was quite clear that this credit market, was not really in the business of delivering anything. So now that we have, as I said, by the end of December, the last 4 years, over 2,000 tons of gold stood for delivery. The question is, how much of that has actually been delivered? Now, the experience of Sprott trying to get hold of its silver rather suggests that there is a hell of a backlog of physical which is being stood for delivery. Now, let's sort of, it has accelerated in the last, in this year. This year so far, it's been running at a rate of over 2,200 tons for this year. This is, if the current level continues. So this acceleration, I think, is probably the straw that is breaking the camel's back, as it were. Now, let's put that to one side and look at it from the point of view of the people who are standing for delivery. We don't know who they are, but I think it's a reasonable guess to suggest that the majority of them have actually taken out their futures positions and have stood for delivery against those through the Globex facility, which, if you like, is the 24-hour facility outside, outside New York. So you've got all these foreigners who've got this stuff stuck in a COMEX warehouse, and they are now agitating to get their stuff out. Why? Because Trump has been elected. They are very concerned about Trump. They're concerned about the future of the dollar. They want physical possession. I mean, the Americans, I mean this most sincerely, as it were, the Americans are not to be trusted as far as the foreigners are concerned. We've had in the past gold confiscation. You just don't trust anything that the Americans say, particularly if you're Chinese, if you're Russian, if you're, in the global South, BRICS, and so on and so forth, which I would guess quite a lot of these stands for delivery are. So I think that's what's happened. We've got a panic, and this is why they're flying in huge quantities of gold from London, and they've tapped out the London bullion market. And so much so that there is now a 4 to 8 week queue at the Bank of England to withdraw presumably leased gold from the Bank of England. So you can see that there's a real panic on here. And then this morning, Reuters reported, or it might have been overnight, reported that gold has actually been coming out of, the customs houses in India. Now, this is gold which has not, if you like, cleared through into the domestic market. What happens is that the big consumers of gold will buy bullion, store it, as it were, in a bonded warehouse, under the sort of customs arrangements, not paying tax on it until they have to, when they then import it into the domestic market. Even they, apparently, have been sending gold back into COMEX. So you can see that there's a huge shortage of physical gold, presumably because these stands for delivery are now coming home to roost. And that roughly, I think, is where we are. Of course, the other thing to bear in mind is that while the crisis, I think, is in gold, very, very definitely, if you look at the way it's accelerated, the stands for delivery have accelerated in the first month and 2 days of this year. You can see why that's triggered an enormous panic. But, gold you can move relatively quickly. That is assuming that you can get it out of the warehouse, which is the other problem. As I said, the Bank of England is taking 4 to 8 weeks, according to the Financial Times, in order to release gold to lessees or, an entity which might actually own it. I think with silver, it's a different problem because you can't really air freight silver. I mean, we're looking at, the last 4 years, something like 25,000 tons has stood for delivery. Now, I mean, you can't put that on an aeroplane. That has to be shipped. So you've got an additional factor, I think, when it comes to silver. And I don't think that's quite reflected in the silver price yet. Silver's beginning to move a bit, but you can see that this is, I think, in the early stages of potentially of a systemic crisis. in these markets, in the bullion markets. And I think where we are is that there is a broadening realization that possession actually is very important. I think as far as the global south was concerned, the first inkling that this was actually very important came from when the American NATO attempt to cut off Russia from Western financial markets by stealing, and there's no other word for it, and I don't apologize for using this word, by stealing Russia's bank reserves, alerted everybody to this. And in the St. Petersburg Economic Forum of 2022, this was something that Putin, majored on in his speech, and that was attended, I think, by over 80 nations and something like 14,000 representatives or something. I mean, this was a very well attended event, and the message was absolutely clear. And he said, you don't want to hold dollars, you don't want to hold euros, and if you've got any gold stored in the Western vaults, then get it out. So, and I think that message is trickling down.